All right, good morning, everybody. Today is March 2nd. I'm Mr. Sheridan. This is Zoology. This is going to be our last day on market steers. So we're going to go through a few things that we want to review that we're looking for when we're evaluating market steers. We got a few new terms for you. So make sure that you have your notes out and you're ready to take those down. Again, even if you're taking pictures of these things that I have up on the board after class, I'm fine with that too. But you've got to have a way to have these down so that you can reference them if you need to. So we're going to go back over the order of importance of things that we're looking for when we're evaluating market steers. So again, the most important thing that we do when we're figuring that out, whether we're talking about breeding stock, market animals, whichever type of market animal we're talking about, we need to figure out what the purpose of that animal is. In this case, in market steers, we're sending these animals to market. So we're looking for muscle. Muscle is what we eat. It's awfully darn important when we're evaluating market livestock. It is the most important thing. If these animals don't have muscle, we're kind of defeating the purpose of what we're talking about. So we look for muscle down that animal's top, through their rump and quarter, down through their stifle. And when we talk about muscle, we're talking about yield grade. Animals that are going to have a good yield grade are heavy muscled and do not have a lot of fat. And the way that that's numbered actually is a little strange, but a yield grade 1 steer is a very heavy muscled steer that's not very fat. A yield grade 5 steer is a very light muscled steer who is incredibly fat. Just to give you an idea again on yield grade. So we are evaluating these animals to hang on a rail, and we're evaluating their carcasses while they are live. So we do need to talk about fat, especially in beef cattle. We need to have some fat because we need these animals to grade. We need them to grade choice on a quality grade scale. When we're talking about that, we talked about extra muscular fat, meaning the fat that they lay over on top that we can actually see, that you start to see in their brisket, on their pins, which is on either side of their tailhead, and in their flank. When you start to see that type of fat, it's a good indication that they also have an adequate amount of intramuscular fat, which is what makes our beef taste good. So we got to have a little bit of fat. But these are live animals. This is not just a meats judging contest. We are evaluating live animals that have to be able to get up, move around, get feed and water, function in their environment. So they do have to have a certain amount of structural correctness. We need these animals to be athletic in the way that they move. They need to flex in their joints. They need to reach out and fill their track. We've talked about long strided animals before, that hind foot should fit in exactly the same spot that their front foot is leaving. But the bottom line here is that we don't want animals that are really struggling to move. Structural correctness is, again, a little bit farther down on our priority list when we're talking about market animals, but this is all subjective. If we get one that cannot move. Good morning, Mr. Cox.
Hello. Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. Yeah, of course. Davide is not. Davide is here.
For your second hour?
He is in, yes, third hour. Yep.
Third hour.
So this is second hour.
Okay.
Third hour, I have my 7th graders. Then I have Davide. Yes.
Gotcha.
And you're absolutely welcome to grab him next hour.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. Okay. So we're talking about being able to move. We don't need cripples. And then after that, then we get into things that are more aesthetic. We want that animal to look nice. We want them to be balanced. We want them to be straight in their lines. We want them to be nicely balanced and attractive. We want them to have nice front ends. We're going to talk about that a little bit here in a second. We've heard some of our people who are giving reasons talk about front ends and that sort of thing. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we want them to be level topped and level hipped, which goes into our balance stuff we talked about. So again, this is our relative order of priority. But again, if you've got one that can't move, that becomes a higher priority. This is all subjective. These things can move up and down depending on the class that you're judging. But this kind of gives you an idea that we've got to have muscle. We've got to have a little bit of fat. They have to move at least reasonably well. And then we're looking at look and style and balance and that sort of thing. A couple of new terms for today. We've talked about pastern a little bit. Just so everybody is aware, and let me share my screen with you really quick so I can find a close-up of an animal. Their pastern is this joint that is right above their hoof. If you think about it like their wrist, okay? It's obviously the closest thing to the ground. They need to have some set to their pastern. You'll see some animals that get right way up on their pasterns and they're very stiff in the way that they move. We want those animals to be more relaxed and have some set to their pastern. And when they move, they should actually be flexing those pasterns. So it's another term that goes into structural correctness that we talked about over here. Going to be much more important tomorrow when we start talking about breeding stock in females than it is here in market steers. But it's also something to note. It's something to add. It can be a tiebreaker if you've got one that has some extra set to his pastern and is really flexible there versus one that's very stiff. Let's talk about front ends. We've heard a lot of these kind of terms. You've read some of them in the officials of the classes that we've done over the last few days. Talk a lot about look and front end. We have a really, really good example to look at here. So yesterday we briefly got into this top pair of steers. And we'll talk about the whole class here in a minute. But I want to focus on these top pair of steers. So we've got 1 and 3. And these are a little bit tricky because the lighting's a little weird. And they're solid black steers, so they're a little bit tough to see. But I want you to take a look at the difference in just the front ends of this steer number 1. And these are both heavy muscled, good bodied, well balanced steers who have plenty of fat. These are good quality cattle. But I want you to look at the difference in the front ends of these two animals. I'm going to give you a minute here. But when you look at 3, this is the kind of attractive, long-necked, smooth-shouldered front end that we're looking for in these cattle. Versus number 1, who actually has more muscle in him, but when you get in his front end, he's shorter necked, he's more coarse in his shoulder, and we can look and see from, I think they're going to give us a better angle here and give us actually a front view of these animals. But this is something that even number 1, you can see that he's still shaped correctly. He's still super wide and stout in his hip. He's got tons of shape down his top and through his quarter. A really good quality steer. But when you see him get out, you can see that he's just not quite as attractive through his front end. He's a little coarser in his shoulder. He doesn't quite get out and flex and move out of his front end as well as this steer. And we'll watch this one go until it gets to that same sort of point. So this is going to be one where number 3, and they're going to use him as their class winner, is also a heavy muscled steer who's got enough fat. He probably gets, if this is a carcass contest, he probably gets whooped by number 1. He doesn't have as much muscle. He doesn't have as much shape down his top through his quarter. But when he gets out and moves here in a second, you'll see how much more flexible he is through his entire front leg. We talked about flexibility in his pasterns. You can see that here. He's longer necked. He's more up-headed. It's hard to see, but he's smoother in his shoulder. This is the better front and more attractive steer who gives up just a little bit of, you can see it here. Whoa, hold on. So this is number 1 over here on the left. And you can see that he's just a little bit coarse in his shoulder, like he's wider right here than this steer is in his. And that's a little, you can just kind of tell. You can see how much longer necked this steer is and more up-headed and attractive he is through his front end versus this steer who's just a little chunky. Why is that important? Why do we care about front ends? Why does it matter if a steer's big and open-shouldered? How many people have ever calved cows before that aren't Holsteins? No offense, but because Holsteins have such big hips, they can handle really big calves. Okay, how about my Hereford guy down here? When you've got big, bulky, open-shouldered calves, it makes calving a whole lot more difficult, doesn't it? Okay, So that's what we're talking about. We do want these calves to be smoother in their shoulder. And that really goes back to the point of why we're doing that, of why we want those neater fronted animals. It's easier to give birth to those kind of animals than those big, bulky, bulldog looking things that you've got to pull and pull and pull to try to get them out. It's dangerous for the calves. It's dangerous for the mamas, that sort of thing. Plus, they're attractive and prettier. So there's a couple different reasons why front ends are important. Again, this goes down to look, it's the lowest part of this priority list. We've got to have these other things before we start looking at that sort of stuff. But it is important, and it is how we can break ties. It is how, and this is a good example of, you've got two good quality steers. They chose to use this look and style of the front end of number 3 over the small advantage in muscle and fat that the one steer has here. So they cut it real small, but that's what we're looking at. Okay, questions about that? Questions about anything that's on the board right now? Okay, then I'm going to stop